When I think back on all the fears when I was pregnant, all of them dismissed except for one. The only test the state mandated was genetic. Looking for that extra chromosome.
Hello and welcome to the If We Knew Then podcast. I'm Stephen Saux,
And I'm Lori Saux.
and today we're joined by Stephanie Hall Meredith, a doctor of public health.
Stephanie is here to have a conversation with us about Down syndrome in case you heard the ignorance that was spewed by that unfortunate YouTuber this week.
So welcome, Stephanie Hall Meredith.
Hello.
Hello, Stephanie.
Oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. We're so thankful that you could be here today because, you know, the first thing we thought about, to be honest, I have not read the post that is causing all of this commotion. The only thing I saw was that my feed, I thought I was on our podcast feed because I was having all these really great advocacy stories come up and I was like, oh, this is really wonderful. And I didn't know because my daughter and I were on a trip, went until I came back and Stephen, forwarded me your post, really what had happened. Now, I did not read because I didn't read the post because there was
Didn't read the post from
the original
Yeah.
thing. We're calling this episode a conversation on Down syndrome if you happen upon the unfortunate YouTuber, because I think it's very unfortunate. I think it's misinformation that is being propagated, and it's really unfortunate. Now, the thing is, I do not believe that any of this misinformation is new to our community, because I feel like all of these things that were said are things that have been said to me when my son was born, when he was first diagnosed by, believe it or not, our geneticist, by the school, by other parents. So all of this information, I don't think is new to our community. I think these are challenges and these are misperceptions that we overcome sometimes on a daily basis. What I do think that it has really brought, which usually happens is when someone isn't on this journey, they're shocked by the information. And in that way, I think that it's really a gift because it starts conversations. And I think the first conversation I would say to anyone not on this journey is this is nothing new. This is something that individuals with disabilities and Down syndrome have been forced to overcome since the Industrial Revolution, when we first started to base people's value on what they could produce. Before that, I think we saw each other. And then after that, we judged each other. So I really wanted to have this conversation, Stephen and I to have this conversation to just talk to the community for anyone who, maybe just got the diagnosis or, whatever the situation is to actually have the information. And then I said, well, let's reach out to Stephanie because you're a doctor of public health and you have so much information. And that's really what we try to do is to get the correct information out there.
Yeah, your post was so factual and not overly emotional, which is something that can be a real reaction to this. So
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and honestly, I was so honored. Thank you for having me. And it's work that I care a lot about and have, devoted the past 20 years to doing that. I actually went back and just finished my doctorate 2 years ago because I'd gotten involved in this work and it was so important to me, specifically improving that diagnosis experience. And a lot of that came for me because I actually had, even 26 years ago, a really great diagnosis experience.
Wonderful.
Our hospital was pretty progressive at the time in that they had parents on staff who came into the room to offer support, and they had parents of children with a range of different conditions. And so they, the day after Andy was born, we had another mom of a kid with Down syndrome come in. She was support staff in the NICU. And she gave us, at the time, the book Babies with Down Syndrome, and she showed us a picture of her son on a bike. And for me, that was such a transformational moment to realize life could still be fun. And I mean, because I was 23 when I had him. And so when I ended up finding out that that was not the case for a lot of other families with Dr. Scott Coe's original research back in 2005, that was when I was motivated. And then ACOG gave their recommendations that all women should be offered screening in 2008. That ended up making me, want to make sure that everybody else got that blanket of support that I got. So that I think that's where my experience might be a little different in that it was a positive one, and I realized what a great trajectory it put us on as a family.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah, because it is that, that characterization of it as a flashbulb memory is so true. I mean, it's cemented there forever. And I think that's why part of why this story really resonated so much with our community is because that is a trauma that people experience and that they remember for decades when it's done poorly. And so I think it just channels all of those feelings of being told, I'm sorry, and the judgment that that conveys that, not just I'm sorry that might be have your child in the hospital right now. It conveys I'm sorry about who your child is fundamentally at a core level.
And I feel like a lot of that, the information that is being propagated with that article is the information that we received with diagnosis. Like that's
Yeah,
how
that flashbulb moment that we
Yeah.
had can be someone else's flashbulb moment when they're just wondering, what do I know about Down syndrome? And they had this article, YouTube video, whatever to go by.
and they don't know it's incorrect. And
Right.
that's the thing. And I was thinking how you received a picture of a child on a bicycle. That's huge because, to the core of what's taken away when we receive a diagnosis in that manner is it's not like the big things really. It's like for Stephen, it was he thought, oh, I'll never play ball with my son. It's these little tiny joys, which is so personal. And I think that's why to take those it feels like such an intrusion because it's these little beautiful moments that before they're even on the trajectory, they're removed. And to see somebody on a bicycle, you go, oh, okay, well, that negates so many of the things that I've just been told, right? So many of the things I've just been told.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think what's so hard when you have content creators out there who are sharing that misinformation is that you feel like we've made so much progress over the past 50 years. And I actually have a presentation I give to genetic counseling students where we talk about Down syndrome in 1970 compared to 2020. And, it looks almost like two completely different conditions. And I say, did anything change on that gene during that time? And of course, they say no. It's like, no, it's access to supports and services and resources. And that's how we have these different outcomes and the huge change in life expectancy, the huge change in literacy, and all of those things. And it just feels like we've made that progress. And then to have someone who's in that 30-year-old age category sharing it with 5 million people about a population of 250,000, it's like you just set us back so many years of trying to convey the progress that this community has experienced in this population of people. So I think that's where I really wanted to break it down and say, this is actually what is true for this population, because almost everything that was conveyed was either false or partial information that really kind of misleads people. Because if you say low life expectancy, I think a lot of people are envisioning, young adulthood or something like that, not 60 and rising, you know. And I think when people hear, things like, well, and the rate of for miscarriage was just completely inaccurate. It is not 50%.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted. Well, Stephen and I were talking, and I was like, we sat down and created this podcast, like preceding everything that was just said, because that was said to us in our journey with Liam, and we wanted to put the information out there and change the narrative. And in one post, that just created basically I felt like, well, you just undid everything that we've been trying to do for so many years.
Well, it's a
But
loud voice, and the
and
community
it's
doesn't have really that loud of a voice.
because we're too busy advocating and doing and changing and all of those things. So I did want to, after we have like a little personal conversation, I did want to go through those little bullet points, and we can talk about them. And what we try to do on this podcast is to normalize it, because I think to put that fear into a woman, to say 50% miscarriage. That was the one that I looked up, and I just Googled 50% miscarriage. And it's like across the board for every woman. Like, I know people who are challenged by infertility or challenged, it's like for women, I think it's like 30%, 15 to 30% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. And if you want to have that conversation and talk about women's health and how hard that is and how we treat women after they've had a miscarriage and expect them to just like, hey, put your shoes back on and go to work, I'll have that conversation, because that's an important conversation. I feel like all of these things that we're just throwing out there are like, yeah, let's have that conversation, but let's have the real fact and the real information. You want to tell me about life expectancy? Why don't we have the conversation about the fact that our children were denied life-saving medical treatments? That's the real reason behind those low numbers. It's not because, just people with Down syndrome died. It's because they needed something and were denied it. And they were denied so blatantly on the fact of that life isn't as valuable. Like back when they really first started to do it, it was like, no, we don't do that for this, And so I just feel like every misinformation that was given is a really important conversation as to wwhy.
And also, the facts that you gave are legitimate, but also we should keep in mind that, yeah, those last, from 1972 to
Now.
2020, 50 years of progress, it's not like it's ending. Where are we going to be in 50 more years? I mean, it's not, right? This isn't like a closed door on this situation. So, but I don't want to digress. Yeah.
No, I don't think you did. I think because I think I think they're really important things that parents should know. And like the medical, we had a doctor from Children's Hospital to talk about some of the medical issues. And I think it's I think it's unfair to every parent to just say it's someone with an extra chromosome. This is what's going to happen. Now, I believe that we're fortunate that we receive. I didn't think that the first when Liam was born and I received that list, but I can look at it with fresh eyes and say, hey, that list can really, it holds that your doctor, your pediatrician, to keep an eye on these things. I have that for Liam. I don't have that for Sophia. I don't have I don't have a list of things when she was born where they ran a list on her genetics and said, hey, these are things I want you to keep an eye on. So in that way, the list can be good, right?
And it can be, and I think also there is a little bit of a risk there, because a lot of times families will report that they just received the list of medical issues. It's important to get that, but they also want to know what life is like and the life outcome information and have it be up to date and accurate. And that's what we found in our research, that a lot of people weren't getting. It's like less than 40% were getting that information. And that kind of goes back to that medical and social model of disability. The medical model of disability characterizes it as just a list of deficits that need to be fixed. Whereas the social model says that a lot of the challenges people face are because of the social constructs and the way that we perceive disability. And so I think that that's the other thing that needs to be considered, is the social justice perspective in all of this. That if you just characterize people by, their deficits, then everybody's going to come up short. You need to give that full picture, that full scope, and to let people know what those improved outcomes are.
With that in mind, how would you present that as a professional in the field?
I mean, I think the first piece of it that at least what we try to do is to train clinicians that is a perspective to even have, because they don't even see people with disabilities as a minority population that has civil rights specifically. And so I think doing that training is important. And then I think beyond that, it's also making sure that when someone receives that diagnosis. And this is what, we've been doing for the past 15 years is creating, we've got resources that give a buffet of information that families want, but we also don't want them drinking from a fire hose because at that point, they're very overwhelmed. So we want to give them snippets of information, the most important information about medical issues, about, family life, about the advocacy organizations that are available to them, and also about, siblings and the available educational and health resources. So, I mean, we've condensed that down really to it's about if you look at it as a Word document, it's a 7 or 8 page book, but it was created with input from the National Medical Genetics and Advocacy Organizations. So it includes all of their perspectives. And then we have photos of people living with Down syndrome. And so you see them working, you see them playing, you see them as part of their family. And we do it as though you're looking through a window so you can see what life is like. And I think that's important too, because when you're first learning about a diagnosis, and this is true across, we create materials about a lot of different conditions. People want to see what daily life looks like. And so giving them that perspective. But then there are a lot of great organizations out there like, Jack's Baskets that gives the baskets. We've got Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network that provides peer-to-peer support. All of these great resources are out there and available to people. And and they're free. We just want people to be accessing them and know that they're there.
And I think that is the challenge because other people might think that this is just the information. And I like that you talk about a little window into the life because I think we just, with the diagnosis, we need to know it's going to be okay, right? And this is going to be what you really make it, just like every other family, And it's like we're having to undo so many stories that no longer, they never had merit, but they're so far away from having any relativity to this journey. And I just want, that's just my wish for parents. We just met a new parent and I was like, this is going to be your journey. And please just do all the negativity. Take any information, like if it can support you or it can guide you to some help, but we really get robbed of the joy and the free will to create or to believe in our children or to believe in their futures, and that's just my wish for every family to feel that empowered,
Yeah, and I think, when we were doing our research, asking parents what they wanted, right? They wanted to know about kind of the full spectrum. So they wanted to know, yes, these are some of the challenges and these are some of the resources to help you address those things. And then these are some of the strengths and these are, what it looks like for people, again, like what it looks like living with these conditions. And I say conditions just because we write resources about multiple, but Down syndrome was our first, and that's what we have available. And the other point I'll make is we have it in 15 different languages and also photos of people from different ethnicities and races, because that's the other thing is a lot of times people maybe we did a big project for over the past few years where we talked to Black and Hispanic parents about what they felt and what they needed. And a lot of times they don't feel like they get the representation and they want to see, families like theirs who also are living with Down syndrome.
And can we call it a naturally occurring chromosomal arrangement?
Hmm?
Yeah, like I feel like that's when it because I forget who gave that to me. It might have been Dr. Scotco because of the different information that is articulated, whether it be from the medical profession who hasn't quite evolved yet, or just somebody who hears something or reads something on social media or whatever it is. But that's one of the things I like parents to know. It is a naturally occurring chromosomal arrangement. So these words that have been used that are so harmful, it's not accurate. It's a naturally occurring chromosomal arrangement. It's not a glitch.
Definitely not a glitch.
I don't even want to use his name. I'm just going to call him the unfortunate YouTuber because I don't want to give power. I don't want to give eyes on that article. I don't, and I just think, but that was a word that was used. And so if you're in your life and you haven't read the article and someone ever refers to, the extra chromosome as that, just know it's not. It's a naturally occurring chromosomal arrangement.
Yeah. How did you come across this article, by the way? I actually came across it because I ran into your post on Facebook somehow. I don't know how that happened. I know your post got a lot of reposts, and then it got me to kind of dive into, oh, well, let me find this article that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, I had friends in the Down syndrome community who texted me and said, "Have you seen this? What do you think about this?" And so it was from friends. And then I was like, did this really happen? Just kind of confirming, did someone actually, say this, and how do we navigate this? And I actually woke up, I think at 4 a.m. on, was it Thursday morning, I think? And it just was roiling around in my head. And because I think I'd gotten that notification maybe Wednesday. And I was like, I get these kind of fits where it's like I have to write it out in order to process it. And so that's really what I was doing, is I was trying to process my feelings about it, but also identify what it was that was inaccurate, that was striking me as untrue, and how to address that. And really doing it from a place too, though, of having empathy for people who probably got misinformation, but then also, deep concern about that being perpetuated beyond them too. And so I wanted to also, for everything I said, to cite the peer-reviewed resource that it came from. And I think that's been kind of the benefit of having recently worked on my dissertation, is that I have all those kind of that were in my that were included in that. So I think that that's really where I was prompted to do it.
Yeah, you were able to fact check, which, a lot of times we get information in the world and we're not able to have a good fact checker. So,
Or do it, or not take the responsibility. There's so many we love movies, and I was just watching Runaway Bride, and he wrote an article without fact checking and was fired. It's like, being held accountable for the information that we put out there is really important. I think that's just a safeguard that needs to be in place. It's not necessarily in place yet because of the inequality, like you said, the social justice of disability. It's just not there. And a lot of times, unless you're on this journey, people will just go, "Oh, I didn't know that."
All content creators really need to be held accountable for how they speak about a population that faces a lot of discrimination, and especially to make sure that their facts are accurate, and don't misrepresent that population. Because, like you were saying before, our family's already, so my son with Down syndrome, Andy, is 26, and we already face so much discrimination in employment and education, and in the medical field. And just recognizing that it perpetuates that to continue, not just at the moment of diagnosis, but throughout the lifespan, and that it's really important to nip that wherever we can.
I have to say, the pushback has been wonderful to see from the whole blog, article, YouTube video, whatever,
Mm.
because there has been pushback. There's been support for the post as well, but maybe this pushback, it does at least shine a light on our community and the truth of our community a bit. Like, this is an opportunity to say, hey, these are the real facts, and that was what was so great about what you're about to say and what you did say. It gives an opportunity to say, hey, let's dredge this up, everyone. Let's put a spotlight on this because it is important.
Well, and also let's highlight where a lot of the problems that people identify aren't because of people with Down syndrome themselves, but because, again, the society that is not giving them the opportunities where they can flourish. And, look, we constantly have to, I mean, I see parents all the time having to fight for inclusion in schools, to be able to fight to get the hours they need for jobs, to get employment opportunities. And all of that is cyclical, and I think that we just really want to make sure that we're addressing any of those areas where our kids can face discrimination that's harmful to them.
We've talked so often about how not being included, not being educated, and then the result of that is then put back on
The chromosome.
Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't say that individuals with Down syndrome cannot live independently or go to school or get a job. You can't say that. That's not the chromosome. Individuals with Down syndrome are denied an education. They're scooted away from the opportunity of, that would propel them to college, to then doing what they love, to finding a field that they love, like everybody has. So I think that's what's missing. And you're absolutely right. And that's what's missing is the whole story. And I can only imagine, maybe we should have another episode where we talk to you, because I can only imagine what your journey was with your son being 26. I know that's
even with
10
a
years.
positive genetic.
That's 10 years. Yeah, that's 10 years before Liam was born.
Mhm.
So I can only imagine
In the
what you
educational system
experienced in
and-
the
yeah.
educational system and fighting for the right and inclusion and in society and all of those. I can only imagine what that was.
And I think what's frustrating is when you do fight those fights and you think you're making it better for the next person behind you, and then you have some setbacks, like a new person coming in, like this happened at our elementary school. A new principal came in and they didn't have the institutional knowledge of Andy having gone through there. And so the next mom faced the same fight. And that's really what this represents too, when you have a YouTuber of a new generation sharing that same misinformation. But I was going to go back to what you said that was so good, Lori, as far as like, if you can't judge what a group of people can do if you don't give them the opportunity. Like, it's no surprise that in 1970, the 50% of children with Down syndrome died in the first year. Well, we also have 50% heart defects and they weren't doing the heart surgery on them. So of course that was it. Now it's greater than, 97%. Not a surprise. Okay. And then we look again at what was the literacy rate back in 1970 was pretty much nothing. And that's because they didn't have a right to a public education until 1975. Until then, they had, I think, 1.5 million children sitting at home who were not able to access the public education system. And then once you give them that opportunity, well, we found out that at least 87% can read at some level. So and that's based on old data. I mean, that's something from 15 years ago. So I think that's what's so frustrating is when that information is rooted in that. But I also think that there's some real just discriminatory attitudes we have in general, like about independence and interdependence, which is something I also brought up. There's this real glorification of independence when in fact none of us live independently. We all have an existence like that. And so I remember, so when Andy was in college, he wanted to move out so badly, and we were sad. We didn't want him to leave. And I remember that, when he was first born, that was one of our first fears. Oh, he's never going to move out. It's never just going to be us again. And then when it actually came time for him to move out, we're like, oh no, he wants to move out. And now we've kind of got this beautiful situation where he spends half the time with us and half the time with my mom, who's 83, and he helps her with, blowing her leaves and taking out her garbage and all the things that she needs help with as an aging person. And she's able to teach him what an iron is, which he never learned at my house. So I think also sometimes we have maybe our priorities mixed up as far as what actually constitutes a flourishing, happy adult life. Like, is adult life complete independence? I don't actually think so. I think interdependence is a lot more communal, beautiful way of looking at the world. So it kind of depends on, what your priorities are and how you see things.
You're
Totally.
absolutely right, especially about the independence thing. I think, and this is something that I speak to this. I'm going to digress to a different area where it's equal. I think about like in school. I think it's the same thing in living is that like, and also why are people commenting? Right? If it's not your, like, we know that's bad manners, but bad manners are okay in this situation. But like, I always think about school, and I now do this at the beginning of every year. I said, you know, this is not going to be tolerated. A low bar for expectation, but now we're going to do that high bar to create failure. So those two things can't exist at the same time. Like you can't say, oh, well, we don't think he's able to do any of these things, and then not give him his supports in the classroom, but then hold him to this high bar. It's like that. First of all, it's a violation of idea to not have those supports in place, you know, and that's a conversation, because that's how we perpetuate failure. And when you think about it, living, like you were saying, interdependently and independently, it's just about living. And it's about the freedom to live your life and create your own life that is being robbed from someone because they have a diagnosis of an extra chromosome, or in most cases, just any disability. Like all of a sudden the world thinks that they can just chime in on what that life should be or look like and what makes it, like you said, successful. I don't think at like, here's full disclosure. Like when I was even 28, not so independent, not great at like leaving a room without blowing out a candle, not great at chopping things or like, and this is not.
What about, you mentioned 20, what about 28-year-olds that are out there apparently like on their own, but come on, mom and dad are still paying this bill or that bill. I mean, that happens. That's
just
natural, and no one calls it anything different.
No one looks at them and says that's a failure, or like tries to impose their belief on, you know what I mean? Like this is the world, this is humanity, and everybody's life should be dependent on what they want to create. And it gets robbed from individuals with disabilities and Down syndrome. Like they used to judge Liam at school, you know, at every IEP, and they talk about behavior, and he's lucky to be in the classroom. And I was just like, no, they're lucky he's in the classroom 100%. And I don't like when we showed up for a birthday party once, and Liam is so well behaved because he's always had a BII with him. And they're like recess, and all the kids screaming, doing everything they're told not to do. And Liam gets up from his desk and he walks outside nicely. And it's just like, why is that what we're supposed to be like? Do you know what I mean? Like how you're, but if Liam did that same behavior, he'd be called into the office.
Or the one or two times Liam does something like that. It's like,
right?
all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait, he hugged somebody, and like.
What about the people that hug him?
Yeah.
But that's an old you know, like I saw you react to that. I saw you respond to that.
Oh yeah, no, I know Andy definitely was called on the carpet for holding hands and hugging a girl that they both liked each other, and they said that's just not appropriate at school. And I'm like, have you walked through the halls of this school? I see a lot more than that, just so you know. But I think just going back to your point about only the people themselves can judge the quality of their life. And I think that's also what was so frustrating to me about what was published is that, you know, there was a comment about the quality of life that, first of all, only people, and this is, I think, true of any population, but only they can decide whether they have a good or bad quality of life. And it's really pretty shocking and for any population to say that 99% are happy with their lives and 97% like who they are. Those are really high numbers. So if you're judging by what people with Down syndrome say about themselves, then they have a pretty darn good quality of life. And then if you look at what families say about their own loved ones, I mean, 99% love their children, 97% are proud of them. And I think, again, only families living with it can say what life is like. We know because we have the lived experience. So I think that's another piece that was just very ableist and concerning to me about the whole conversation surrounding that. And I think that's why I was so glad to see so many self-advocates with Down syndrome speaking up about their own lives, sad about some of the backlash that they got that I think was just abhorrent, but they were speaking their truth for what they live, and only they can say that. And so I think that was another piece that was really concerning to me, and where we actually have data out there. Like, this is what we live. but it is also quantified with peer-reviewed data that was painstakingly um, through painstaking recruitment by Dr. Scott. So I think that that's kind of the other piece of it that's so important. And I liked what you said too about Liam and other people benefiting from him, because I have this presentation I give to educators. I've also worked on some other education and employment projects, but just about, yes, there are all these great benefits to people with disabilities because of inclusion, but there are also a ton of benefits for the other typically developing students. Um, increases in empathy, but also actual academic performance because of different ways of accessing the curriculum. So I think that that's important in any conversations we have, to not just act like our children are benefactors. And I think that's where we have to be really careful about some of the stories that kind of end up being the viral ones about that are inspirational, that it's not just, oh, it's so nice of these kids to include this person with Down syndrome. Yes, it is for anyone to be included, but that person also brings a lot of value to where they're at.
Our mantra has been that Liam is an asset in the classroom, and it's not a pity party. It's a right, and he's an asset. He brings something to the class.
And when you
a lot.
Yeah, and the thing that is what the key point is having his right to an education be upheld. That's for Liam, that's what's critical. And the great thing about him showing his ability is just having his right to an education be upheld. And if you want to talk about how was it said, the quality of life, the real poor quality of life happened when children with Down syndrome were taken away and put into educational institutions, and then those institutions were revealed for what they are. And that was the poor quality of life. And that would happen to anybody. That would happen to anybody. And again, they took that information and they used that as, this is what the disability looks like, but it's not. That's what abuse looks like. Mm-hmm. That's what discrimination and prejudice and just like all of the worst parts of humanity. That's how, when we really treat people horribly, that's what happens to their life. And it's sickening and sad.
It's a Ricky Bobby quote that you say where it's like, don't put that on me. I mean, that's like, it's not,
I love Ricky
this isn't Down syndrome. You're trying to define it by putting someone in such terrible conditions and then saying, hey, look what's happened.
And we were talking about movies, and we're talking about the evolution of anything as a society. Go back and watch The Birdcage. Go back and watch The Birdcage and look at how, like, just being part of the LGBTQ community, look at how that was viewed. Look at how things were okay. And just like, and we've evolved. If you can go back and watch any movie and see how we've evolved on certain things. Like, we can hear in any movie, like the worst movie I think is the movie Freaks from 1933, that was a horror film, but that very truthfully depicts how society viewed disability. And then when we go back with hindsight, we say, oh my gosh, that is horrible. And look how much we've grown, or look how much we need to change, or how is that allowed? I think that happens in most cases except disability. You know what I mean? I don't think that we look back, and too often, I don't think society looks back and says, oh, that was really wrong.
I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges we have, is that we don't teach disability civil rights in public education. And so people are exposed to that popular media and the way that it's presented, but they don't watch things like Crip Camp. They don't learn about Judy Heumann and some of those great civil rights leaders in the disability community to be able to combat those perceptions. And so they don't recognize it. Because, yeah, I mean, gosh, I love John Hughes movies growing up. And then going back and looking at 16 Candles, I'm all, oh my gosh, there's so much problematic stuff in here when you go back and look at it with your kids. And the reason why I recognize it is because I've been educated over time. But like, about disability issues, we receive very little public or social education in order to be able to identify when that discrimination was happening and what that looks like, and also what it looks like now when it manifests itself.
And why certain things are still like challenged as being okay. Certain words, people will still dig in and be like, I was joking. And that's okay. And hopefully that's changing, but you just see it and it will turn things off as soon as certain words pop out of people's mouths. But if it's okay, can we go through some of the points that you made? Because we didn't talk about the pregnancies, one in 800 pregnancies.
Right. So the quote, and I mean, this was just a minor thing, but it's accuracy, right? He said that the occurrence rate was 1 in 1,000 when it's actually 1 in 800.
And it's not dependent on, like, I know when I was pregnant with both of my pregnancies, it was my age. Anything over 35 is considered, but that's not true as well.
Geriatric, yeah.
I can't even.
I know that's such a neat term.
That is just like, who even?
Your odds do increase with age.
But you were 23 when your son was born.
True. So like my odds would have been lower than the average at 23, and then they get higher as you age. But there are also other things that can increase your odds. Like if you get ultrasound findings that show some of the soft markers, then it would be higher odds with that too. So, or if you've had a previous pregnancy where you've had a child with Down syndrome, your odds also increase. So there are different things that can increase the odds, but generally for the whole population, it's 1 in 800.
And you had talked about the heart defects, and that he was saying, well, 50% have some heart defect and needs a surgery, but you had a great comeback where it's like, well, okay, but the heart is being corrected.
Right. I mean, AVSD repairs, or I'll get the words mixed up if I try to say them out loud, but AVSD repair is 97% successful, according to Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and they are one of the leading providers of that surgery. And so, I think it sounds really scary when you say 50% have heart defects, but then when you learn about the success rate, it's like, okay, any major surgery for a child is going to be scary, but when you get that reassurance, it helps to ease your concerns.
And it's also not a condition that's just special to individuals with Down syndrome. Other children have this.
Right.
Challenge.
Correct.
Right. Other children require this surgery. And I think that is what's not communicated. Like, what's not communicated is children, period, can have this surgery, and it's probably so effective not because individuals with disability had it. It was perfected under the guise of saving infants' lives. And that is the information that I just across the board on medical conditions. Are there any conditions that are only individuals with Down syndrome? Or is this just like maybe the rate increases? Do you know what I mean? Like and I think that's the misinformation that is so scary to parents.
Yeah, I think so. For any of those conditions, those are comorbidities. So some of them are found more often in children with Down syndrome, but they occur also in the rest of the population. And there are treatments that are available for all of them, and so, yeah, you say 75% have hearing issues. Well, but they can be corrected through usually tubes, which a lot of kids get.
Mm-hmm.
They can be corrected with hearing aids. Andy used hearing aids for a while and then ended up not needing them later as his tubes grew and as he got that procedure done. And then vision impairment, usually corrected with glasses. How many of us wear glasses? Like those are not, and I think I may have quoted the numbers just wrong, may have gotten them reversed between hearing and vision, but those are issues that can be easily corrected. And I think too, you look at even people with Down syndrome also have increased GI issues. But those can also be corrected in surgery in the first year of life and really successful surgeries. So I think that it makes families unnecessarily concerned when they're just told the medical issues and not also given information about the possible treatments.
And also, it's not every single person. So it's, again, taking that right away from parents to be on this journey, right? And I remember Liam and Sophia both had a season of ear, nose, throat. Like they would get a cold that would turn into an ear infection and throat. And it was both of them, and they would toss it back and forth to each other. And our pediatrician, because Liam has smaller tubes, she said, I just want to make sure that the ear infections don't cause any kind of permanent scarring. I want to look into tubes. And immediately I freaked out because, of course, anything that has any procedure, but Sophia had to have procedures for different things it wasn't worse thinking about tubes for Liam than what Sophia had to go through. And it was like, that's just because you are a parent. But what Sophia had to endure, that was like very specific and unique. Liam getting tubes, I spoke to adults and they were like, adults that I work with. Yeah, I had tubes when I was little. Like, this is something that like is so common. It is so common. So it can't be like...
The weight can't be there.
The weight can't be there because it's like, go anywhere and ask. You're going to get another adult in the room that'll be like, oh yeah, I had that. Right? Like it's not something that should just weigh so heavily, as you said, Stephen. And with the eyes, it's like, he's got glasses on. He has weak eyes,
Yeah, Liam doesn't have glasses. In fact, his
Sophia wears glasses. Liam doesn't.
Yeah, his optometrist said that if he does need glasses in the future, it's probably because of me.
Right, and I think
not
that's
Down syndrome.
It's like you're taking away the power of a beautiful family and how we affect each other, right? You're taking that away when you just put it across the board in something that's not founded in truth. And when we look at Liam's eyes, yeah, that's scary. And Liam hates doing eye drops, and that's just something like that we have. Like everybody hates eye drops at a certain point. Like that's not fun. But the thing is like what you want is to have a doctor who sees your child the person in front of you and not a diagnosis, and then treats whatever is the situation, whatever we're looking at.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is we have great guidelines from American Academy of Pediatrics, and you've got a list of things, yes, that they should be checking for because they occur more often in Down syndrome. But like you said, Lori, like they're going to have their own unique constellation of them, and they may have 2, they may have 5. It's not the same for each person. Andy did not have a heart defect. He had hearing issues. He's had some vision issues. And like you said too, Stephen, it's like when we were told when he was born, yeah, people with Down syndrome tend to be short and they tend to have vision problems. We're like, yeah, so do Meredith's. So there you go. It's part of our family.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I think Liam's as tall as me, or he's passing me really soon. I wanted to go down developmental, learning, and physical. Like these are things that, like we're told not to compare children, and you wouldn't dare diminish another child's value because of timelines or milestones. Yet this list, okay, so you have some milestones that come in. They come in slower, right? Like, and especially without early intervention. Now, they don't talk about that, these milestones might be reached quicker with early intervention, like PT for walking and speech. And speech, we were denied, like for early intervention, we were denied speech. There was all these reasons and excuses. But I think that now that the research is there, that it helps. And we got to the point that we would then meet parents of children who came through the system later, and they had more information, so they advocated for it, and their child got speech, but not only got speech, but got speech from a good speech provider, and their articulation was like, we were jealous. There were points, like,
or they
I
got
had to be
private
honest.
Speech.
Yeah, or they got private speech,
too.
and I had to be honest with moms and go, I got to tell you, I'm super jealous because part of me believed what they told me. And I don't do that often. And I see the difference from get a good speech pathologist early on that helps develop those muscles and develop that speech. Right. But I want to talk about like and then there's the learning. every child can learns at their own rate. Every child. I'm not just talking about people with an extra chromosome. Every child benefits from having an individualized education plan, whether it's called an IEP or not. Like when I was doing homework with Sophia, it looked a lot different than, how her friend's mom was supporting her on the same assignment. Like get a group project together and go do a science project in 7th grade and see if everybody learns the same, see if everybody performs the same.
It is true that our kids have learning and developmental disabilities, and that is very common in that population. But I do think it's important to give families the understanding that they're not alone in addressing that and helping their children reach their milestones, and that early intervention is available from those 0 to 3 years. And it often does accelerate the timeline for them to accomplish those milestones. And then in addition, you have access to special education services, which should range from, full inclusion, to some people might need speech, different types of therapies in the school. Some people might need, some specialized classes. There's a full suite of services that should be available to them. Now, if you want to get with me about one of the biggest challenges being navigating some of those systems, I agree. I think it's unnecessarily hard, but those services are available for us. Yeah, early intervention was pretty easy to access, and school was up and down, in different years. I think too, though, I tried to be careful in saying that because I do have friends who've done all the things, and their kids still have some significant disabilities, and I don't want to quantify their existence as being not as meaningful and valued as people who might be performing more strongly in certain areas. So I tried to include that caveat in there, that the research, and this is what Dr. Skotko's research tells us, is that the people, in how they reported their satisfaction in life with their children, it was it was still consistent regardless of the performance of, or the functioning of the person with Down syndrome. I hate using those words because I don't like qualifying people that way, because I feel like I think people are actually a lot more zigzagged than that. But I wanted to be sure not to make it sound like we're we're not valuing that full spectrum of people. And so that's why I said there are these resources to help support, but at the same time, the research also shows us that people across that spectrum are still valued by their families and communities.
I think the difference is that it's not a conversation we would dare to have about someone else's life if they didn't have a disability or Down syndrome. And that to me is absurd, that somebody else thinks that they can look at me, know nothing about me, and tell me what I can do and what my worth is. And that's really like the
Pretty
conversation.
self-righteous
That's
there.
so self-righteous. And it's also like what that creates. And there's the study of the elephants, and you tie them, put a thing around their ankle, and if you do it for long enough, they're not going to move no matter what chain, when you take the chain away. And that's real life. That's anybody. That's any human. That's the situation. So the conversation that needs to have is that people need to just mind your own business.
I think so much truth in all of that. I think that it's important to give our kids with Down syndrome all of the opportunities, and see what they can do. And then there might be times where they do all of the things and more that we want them to, for them, and there might be times when they really struggle with things, but to love and accept them regardless of what happens once we give them those opportunities, right? And so my friend Nancy and I have this kind of metaphor where we're like, our kids aren't vending machines. We put the quarter in. Let's assume it's a quarter, and you don't necessarily get the Sprite out, but you still put the quarter in, and then you're happy with whatever comes out. I mean, I think that's kind of the key, because that's the truth for all of our kids. Like you you will put a ton of work, a ton of opportunities, ideally into all of these kids, and they're still going to have their own strengths and weaknesses, challenges, interests that are different from and exceed and sometimes are not what you would do. And that's part of being a parent, right? Like it's not a formula.
Yeah, and that's you're talking about every child,
Yeah.
every child. And okay, so I want to make sure I cover a lot of these things that I know we're over the hour, but the point you point out, delay doesn't determine their value. Yes, a delay doesn't determine somebody's value. That's period. That's every human. This my thing is that's every human. Every human has these rights. Every human has these conversations. So it shouldn't be any different for somebody with Down syndrome. Like, and it shouldn't be presented as any different to parents. It shouldn't be presented as a less valuable life. Blessing comment. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's the one where how can you possibly determine what is a blessing for someone else and in this world? Um, and that was where I certainly have my own personal feelings about the tremendous value of my son in my life. Um, where I would not be doing the work that I'm doing if it weren't for him. I wouldn't have gotten to, I mean, aside from the joy of who just he is as a human being, and and that's huge. He is my son. I love him. I am so proud of him. He, um, I had a really great question at a conference one time, and they said, when was the time you were most proud of your son that had nothing to do with an accomplishment? Because I'm kind of moving, proud of a lot of his milestones, but I loved that question because it came to my mind almost immediately. And it was like, actually, it was one time when my younger daughter collided with another basketball player on the court, and they ricocheted off each other, and he fell on the ground, or she fell on the ground, and you could hear like her head hit the floor hard. And before any other adult in the room could do anything, Andy jumped over two bleachers and he went and he scooped her up. And he didn't care about the rules. He didn't care about anything. It was just raw compassion for another human. And to me, that's the time I have been most proud of my son. And I've seen it in many other circumstances where, he had a friend whose girlfriend passed away in a car accident. And he went over to her house, and unlike every other kid who went over there and tried to ask, "Are you okay?" and talk to him about it, Andy could just sit with him in grief. Those aren't things you can quantify on a scale, but it is a blessing to have him in my life for those reasons. But as just a human being for me, I've gotten to have a career I never would have had. It's so much more meaningful because of him. I've gotten to go to Japan and Russia and teach about Down syndrome. How cool is that? And so my life is infinitely better because he's part of it. And the thing is if it were just me, maybe someone could say, you're just an N of one. Who are you? But that's not what the research shows us. The research also shows us that 99% of parents love their children and 97% like them. And also the majority feel like they're better people because of their children. So that's where I really took issue with someone else presenting that as a truth when they haven't lived it.
I think that is the one comment because I think as a community, we can all have empathy because we've all received this false information. And it's sad because we know they just received false information and they didn't think to actually look in places where the information would be. And we get that because we know it hurts. Like I know how my diagnosis felt when it was delivered. I know how I feel in every IUP when it comes from a place of ignorance, how challenging that can be. And I want to help that teacher have the access to what they need. But for someone to say something so like you don't have any knowledge. You have no idea what you're talking about. And even if that's how you feel, that's how you feel about you. Don't who would deign to tell me how to feel or what, like, you don't know my life. Like, I exponentially better human. I can say that. I care about, I mean, I cared before, but I care. I want to know why. I want to care about you without wanting anything in return. And that's what I learned from my son. He doesn't have an ulterior motive. And he can see someone's, like you said, he'll see someone needs something and he's not trying to get anything. He's not trying to do it right. He just sees somebody might just need a hand on a hand. And I think that was the comment that was just like, that wasn't even based in ignorance. I don't know what it was based in.
I mean, I think it's based on societal ableism and perceptions of people with disabilities and especially intellectual disabilities, you know? And in that way, I mean, I do and don't blame them because it is something that my friend Kara Ayers, who actually has osteogenesis imperfecta, she calls ableism smog because it's permeates all of our society and people don't even realize that it's around. And so I think people make those statements and they don't even realize that it's a discriminatory thing to say. They think that they're just reflecting what they see is true. And it's because we're surrounded by that smog that they don't even see it. But I still, I don't know, but I still think that it is also incumbent upon us to recognize when you're saying something about a population that experiences discrimination that you need to be careful. And especially as a content creator with that level of a platform, you need to be aware of it because you shouldn't be able to say that about any marginalized population, including people with Down syndrome and intellectual disabilities.
You wouldn't get away with it at all. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think also we have to look at it and go, for the most part, it was misinformation. That's just an opinion. And because it was kind of ushered, like put in the pile of garbage, like it was all just information. Like do you know what I mean? The whole blessing comment, that's your opinion. And it's unfortunately, I think everybody in this community was just like, oh man, you don't even know what you just missed out on. You have no idea. But you can't just make that comment. You can't devalue somebody. You can't tell me the sky isn't blue. Like you just can't. It doesn't make it so.
And that's the thing is I think this became about making judgments about someone's reproductive decisions. I'm not doing that. I'm not sitting here making judgments about your reproductive decisions. What I'm making judgments about is misinformation and bias that has been perpetuated on a content creator's platform as though they are an expert when they are not.
That's absolutely it. Because that's one of the things that we've discussed about this episode is it's not about what their choice was. We honor everybody's choice. We honor their choice. It's the way it was presented. It's eugenics. That is what that platform is lifting up. And that was really important to us for that clarification because that's not the part. The part is that you devalued our community and you set us back. You set us back because now I've got to go back to school and I've got to maybe deal with somebody who's new, who's seen that and looks at Liam and thinks all of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as a community, I think it's important to continue to have the conversations. And I was so happy just to see all the advocacy and self-advocacy. And honestly, I was really encouraged by the amount of individuals that don't have a child with Down syndrome who came in on the conversation and were like, this is ridiculous. Like you can't and I saw one mom was like, if this makes you ill in your stomach, the next time you talk to your student and talk to them about how they treat the other kids in their classroom, how they welcome other kids in their classroom, how they see other kids in their classroom. So maybe, that's the gift, is that it becomes, it's not just a bubble conversation, where it's people in our own community, but that people start to see that it's wrong. Maybe they do identify that individuals with Down syndrome and disabilities are a marginalized group, a minority that needs to have their value and rights upheld. And then when someone says things like that, it creates as much of a stir as if they said it about any other marginalized group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I was hoping for, just to articulate it, was that people would be able to share with their friends and family. I mean, who am I? Like I'm a mom sitting here in Canton, Georgia. Um, but I thought, well, at least if other people can share accurate information with their friends and family, then we can also swell that understanding. And I hope that helps, especially if we all do it in our own little corners.
Yeah, I think that's how we make the change.
Yeah.
I will say too, I don't know if you wanted to talk about this, but that other statistic that was incorrect that gets touted a lot is that we do not have a 90% termination rate. It's actually 74% of people who get an amnio or CDS. And most people don't do that. So Dr. Skotko's research actually found that it's more of a 37% reduction rate. And I think that's an important one to clarify, because I've heard it used on both sides. I've heard it used from an angle of, we need to do something about this because 90% are being terminated, and I'm just doing what everyone else does because 90%. But it's actually a lot more nuanced than that. So I did want to clarify that too in the article, just because he used that number.
Yeah, that's good to be specific, because it can be used as kind of a weapon in a discussion where, it needs to be truthful.
Well, and the thing of it is you're talking about, and this is what really bothered me as a mom who knows that when I'm pregnant, anything that I'm absorbing, like stress, those things are like bad for parents. So the false information really it takes its toll on, you want to enjoy your pregnancy. You don't want to take that away from a mom who's creating this life. And we know that that's a gift. We know that to be like, I've had enough experience in my life to know, and I've known that I don't take for granted the gift it was that I was able to get pregnant and have two beautiful children. I don't take that for granted, not a day in my life. I know that it's not a gift that some of my dearest friends were able to have, and I've seen the toll. So it's just like, to put that, it's just selfish. It's one of the things that as women we endure, right? It's one of the things as women that you have everybody like commenting on what you should do or what you should feel or what you should think or what you should eat. And so I think having that information be correct is really important, because that's also, it's hard to create your own life. It's not hard for my son, which is a gift, but it's hard to create your own life and make your own choices and make your own decisions. And when people give you the wrong information, it's even harder, because then the information, I always say, like, I can look back on things and go, oh, I wish I would have said or done or whatever. And somebody taught me this phrase, which was, I made the best decision I could have with the information that I had. So that's when it relies on the information. The information needs to be correct. The way the information is given needs to be if it's not in a neutral, supportive, informative way. If you can't be supportive, you just give me the information without opinion, and let the information be correct. And I think that's what this whole conversation and what is the most that that we can do is to change and make sure that information is correct.
And I think one day people will have that information from an actual lived experience. I mean, it's a big problem when people with Down syndrome aren't included in our community, where we're not interacting together. So people have like zero personal information about somebody. And so they'll take whatever information they can at a last minute thing, or just gather information, and then they get bad information. You're getting the most truthful information when you're incorporated together. You're in class together. You go to church together. You see each other at the store. You're just living in a community that's inclusive.
Yeah, I mean, Andy was an Eagle Scout, or is an Eagle Scout. You always are once you are. And was in Scouts. He's been a lacrosse coach for the past 6 years. And I think about all of these boys who've grown up with him, and it has to change how they see the capacity of people with Down syndrome, because he's been a part of their lives that whole time. Um, and I think too that, as we talk about information, like you have different informational needs at different stages too. That's why, I kind of mentioned our one resource that's for people first getting a diagnosis, but we also have, I shared our Down syndrome pregnancy materials, because once people adjust, they have a lot more information needs. So they want to know how to, about breastfeeding. How do I tell my friends and family? How do I deal with ignorant comments? How do I do all those things? So like where one is a really short piece, the other one's like a 150-page book, and it's again free online. Like we just want people accessing whatever's helpful to them. But I think that it's really important to give people those layers of support. And of course, again, the live support from their local, national organizations. There are so many great resources out there, but a lot of times it's helping people filter to what is that the most helpful to them and the most credible. Because if you Google, you can get any number of things that pop up, and you want to make sure they're not going down a Reddit hole, and instead are getting a curated list.
Thank you for putting the researched information, the facts. Thank you for putting that out there, because it needs to be out there, and for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much for having me and for all the work you do. It's been so fun to go back and listen to your podcasts and learn more. And I hope that everything goes much better this week than it did this past weekend, because I think it was a rough weekend for all of us emotionally that way. So just appreciate all that you do and that we're in this together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Please follow us on Twitter at If We Knew Then Pod, and you can drop us a line on our Facebook page at If We Knew Then Pod, or visit our website, ifweknewthen.com, to send us an email with questions and comments. And you can join our mailing list there and get alerts of future podcast episodes. All these links will be added to this episode's show notes. Thank you again, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of If We Knew Then.